Hi everyone, we're going to be looking today at how we import the vRealize automation and vRealize orchestrator packages found in my GitHub locations, which I'll put in the bottom here on the video recording, into the environment so that we can interact with the data management for VMware Tanzu services so that we can deploy database instances as a service through the governance and RBAC control of vRealize automation. Some of this work builds upon my other blog posts. So we start off with our data management services. You need to have the minimum viable setup available so that we can deploy database instances into your vCenter environment. And essentially, I've then built a number of packages with Catherine Skilling, who's been absolutely amazing through this process, using the APIs of the product itself. So just a couple of things to call out in the data management system. I may call this DMS for short throughout the video as well, that may use that interactively. We need an organization setup, so I've got one here, which is called the Educate Tenant. We need an administrative user that's available as well. And we're going to use that admin user that's got the org admin role for the connectivity through the API. And obviously this is because the end user won't see that user, they will control with a service catalog, so they actually won't be able to do anything with this org admin user outside of what they need to either. Okay, so let's dive straight in. So of course this video accompanies the blog post. I'll put the link at the bottom of the recording if you found this video a different way than the blog post itself. But I just thought it might be easy to have a quick video guide as well. So in our vRealize automation, we're going to go to the orchestrator. And the first thing we're going to do is going to import our first package. So in the blog post, and again I'll put it in the video, is GitHub link or code.vmware.com link where you can get hold of the files that I'll use in this video. We're going to import the first package. So if I go to my folder that's been brought down into the vRealize orchestrator folder, and we're going to bring in this com.vmware.dms backup.package into the environment, and we're going to import that. You may end up with a button here that asks you to verify or trust this package for the publish certificate as well. Of course, this is because it's coming from my lab environment that I've exported it from, so you'll need to trust that certificate in your environment. Okay, so inside of this package, we've then got a number of REST objects and dynamic types that you need to be aware of, and content that's available as well in here. And this content is a number of workflows, which is most of the work. There's two actions that we use in there, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. It's configuration elements where we store some data inside of VRO itself, and a resource element. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our configurations. A number of these configurations here actually just hold the JSON inputs for some of the REST API calls for the request bodies. And then here we've also got login credentials as well, and the JSON body for the login request. We're going to go to variables. We need to set the appropriate username. So I'm just going to change that to be the username domain for my login. We're going to set the password as well. Now the password is set in a secure string, which means it will be starred out. However, when you look at the logging through the VRO workflows, this secure string will show in plain text. I've essentially worked with Catherine to build this as a minimum viable product. There are other methods available to ensure that you can pull this password as a secure string and it's not shown in the logs, or interact with third-party credential management products as well. So you would need to change the workflows to handle that. Obviously, we're doing this more as a proof of concept in this environment here. So we'll close out from here. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to go to our workflows, and we need to open up. We're going to have this DMS manual folder, and within there we're going to have a number of folders available and subtasks. These are the two main tasks that are going to be used as custom resources in VRA, and there's a number of supporting tasks as well. One task that we need to actually first work with is if we open up the subtasks, we go to the get user inputs, prepare to create the JSON body, and we need to edit this file. And then we need to go to the schema tab, and we need to click on here, and essentially what this workflow is doing is it's taking the user inputs that we would have from VRA, from running our workflows, and then it passes them into our JSON body itself. The one we're actually interested in here is we need to replace this environment ID string. So you can either get this from calling the DMS API directly through Postman, curl, or another method. If you go into the data management system through the UI, you can go to the infrastructure page, you can go to the agent VM where it's connected, your particular vCenter that you're interested in, and when that page is opened up, you can just grab the ID from here as well. If you wanted, you could build a workflow which calls off and gets the ID for you. If you have multiple environments available, you could also create a selection list. We've done this very similar when we look at the template ID workflows, and we pass this up to the user in the service catalog in an action that we showed earlier. You could replicate the same methodology to achieve this with the environment ID as well if you have multiple environments available. So we'll just go ahead and save that. So I'm going to click close here. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is, because we're interacting with the REST API, we need to update the REST host which has been brought into the system with the invoke REST requests or methods attached to them. So if we open up the library folder, and didn't call this out earlier, but if you've seen the tiles, for example, then you can change this in the right hand corner to the tree view, which makes it a lot easier to navigate. We're going to open up the HTTP REST folder. We're then going to open up the configuration folder, and then we're looking for this update a REST host option. We're going to click run here. We're going to click in this white space next to host to be updated. It's going to give us a list. You should see just one HTTP REST in there. We will select that, and actually if you open it up you'll see the other requests attached to it. We're going to select that, and once we've selected it, you're going to see once it loads another number of tabs come up. You need to change this to your environment. So in the host properties, you can change the URL to your environment. The VRO orchestrator, of course, is going to need access to the environment to validate this. If you're using self-signed certificates, then select this option as necessary. You don't need to change the host authentication settings because we've built a workflow to handle that as well. You may need proxy settings in your environment as well. So I'm just going to click this button so that I can update it. We'll click run, and then that should be successful pretty quick for us, and we'll click. Okay, so the next thing that we will need to do is import our dynamic type configuration. Now, although the configuration is a package, we don't import it through the packages interface. We need to do this under the workflows, the library, dynamic types folder, then configuration folder. And then you've got an import configuration from a package, and this is because it creates all of the dynamic type information in the background for us. So we're going to click run on here. We're going to select our packages to import. We're going to select this dynamics type -config package. And then when it reloads, you should see a single namespace which says DMS. We're going to click run here, and then it should run pretty quickly. However, in testing, I did notice sometimes when it creates all of the dynamic types, depending on how many other configuration in your environment, it could run for a couple of minutes as well. So don't worry if it sits there kind of running constantly for quite a while, for a couple of minutes. It will be doing its work in the background. So just come out of this. So we can actually test that all of this is now working in the system. So inside the dynamics type, I won't go into too much detail in this video or in the blog post for setting all this up, but we will produce and release a separate blog post talking about the dynamic type that will be wrote by Catherine. But essentially, we've got a number of REST methods that get all of the databases, find the database by ID, find any relations in there as well. And this is pertinent to how dynamic types actually works within what's called a dynamics type namespace. But if we actually go and view that, as long as our username, password, and host configuration is correct, we can go to inventory. We can open up dynamics types. We'll see our DMS namespace there that we imported. And then under that DMS namespace, you should see a database folder. And then if we open that this will now call off to the DMS APIs, authenticate, and get the list of available databases in the system as well, and populate a number of information parameters for it as well. If we open up the hierarchy, then we're going to see a hierarchy of a database folder, and a database lives within the database folder as a relationship. Okay, so that's the vRealize automation orchestrator configuration completed. Now we're going to move into Cloud Assembly, and we're going to start creating this as a custom resource so that we can use it in our environment. So we'll go to Cloud Assembly, we're going to go to the Design tab, and then Custom Resource. We're going to click New Custom Resource, and we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this DMS Database, and then as Custom Resource type, I'm going to call it DMS.database, with DMS being the system that I'm interacting with and database being the object that I'm interested in. I want to activate this, and I'm going to leave the scope so it's available for any project. I need to add a lifecycle action. So I'm going to type in DMS create, and we're going to see there's a number here of returned responses. The one that we're interested in here is this custom resource version. This custom resource version has an additional couple of workflows in there for monitoring the log files before it returns a successful or failed error message back to VRA, whereas the just standalone create database is basically the workflow which calls the invoke workflow just to create the database itself. So we're going to import that. You're going to see that the external type is automatically selected for us, and then we need to add a destroy lifecycle action there as well. So I'm going to do the same, DMS delete, and we should find a workflow called delete a database, and I'm going to add that in. And then we can also add in a number of day 2 actions that have been created as well. So again, in the search, I can type in day 2 here, and we've got 4 actions. We've got create a database backup. So this all has to be in lowercase with hyphens, which is really helpful. So create a database. I say it's really helpful because I always forget about this piece. I'm just going to give this a nicer name because it's going to show up for the end user's day 2 action. We don't need any conditions here. But you could add them if you so wanted. Scale those database resources. Now, I've created things like power on and power off these database instances as well, because VRA, when it creates a custom resource, doesn't understand what a custom resource is when it creates it. It's essentially running a number of workflows which have been attached to it. So therefore, to give this a little bit more control to the user, we've created these additional day 2 actions as well. Okay, and we could go ahead and click create. I can also change the request parameters on each of these. So if I click here, it's going to ask me to save this first anyway. So it's the same as clicking the create button. So I'm going to click save here. It's going to take me to a customized form view for each of these actions. And essentially one of the things that you want to make sure is visibility set to no is this result object. So this result object relates to the Dynamics type configuration, whereby VRA is passing through the Dynamics type object back to the VRA workflow to identify which database element it needs to run this day 2 action against. So the end user wouldn't be able to configure this, and the end user wouldn't be able to do anything with this, so it can be hidden from them. Of course, though, for something like a backup name, they would need to do that, provide that themselves. Okay, so I'm going to click update on there. That's updated. When you've made these changes, you don't need to update the full form itself. We're just going to imagine I've been through each of these for today. We can click on the Properties tab. The Properties tab is going to show each of the available properties of the custom resource that's been pulled through from the create workflow. Okay, so if I go to Cloud Templates now, and I create a blank canvas, so we're going to call this create DMS database. I'm going to search for my project. And if I scroll to the bottom now, we can see I've got my custom resource available, and I can drag and drop this onto the canvas and then interact with it. So I can do the same as that I'm used to with VRA. If I click the Properties tab here, it's going to tell me all of the child fields that it passed through to the system as well. And in the folder structure, I've also giving you the ability here for a example environment. So I'm just going to quickly open that up, and then we are going to copy and paste that for you just to get ahead of time. So I've added a number of user inputs that I would like from the environment. I've set a number of defaults for the time being as well, and some things I've hard coded in there as well. A couple of things to just call out about the inputs as well. So for a number of local backups and days and remote backups and days, the remote backups needs to be a 2 times multiplier of the local backup days. That's the configuration of the actual system itself. Everything else essentially is inputs. For memory and disk size, we're looking at an input in gigabytes. For CPU cores, it's just an integer. For the automated backup start time, we're looking at a value which is hour, colon, minute. So in my environment here, I've just made it nice and easy where I give the user some enumerated values rather than letting them set it themselves, but you could also use regex to control what the user inputs from that point of view as well. And then if I click deploy on here, I'm going to call this vEducate demo DMS 01. Of course, I've already filtered out the number of defaults to make it a lot quicker for myself as well, but we'll call this VRA Demo 01 as the instance name inside of DMS itself. I'm going to click deploy on there, and we'll be taken through to the view. If I click the history, we'll start to see this go through approvals as well. And then we can see that the workflow's been executed. If you're using vRealize Automation 8.5 or above, we now have the ability to see the workflow details in VR itself. We can click the More Details button here. This will show us it under the Extensibility tab for the workflow run, and essentially this is pulling out the data from the workflow itself, which can be quite handy so you don't have to click around as much. I can also go into the vRealize Orchestrator client directly myself, so I can go to workflow runs here, and we can see that it's also running in the VRO environment as well. This is going to run for a couple of minutes as it creates the database, and essentially there's a task in there which monitors the output of the task status through the API as well, and goes through a loop until it either hits 100% or the task equals successful. If we go into our DMS interface, so I'm just going to log out whilst this is happening and log in as my administrator user. If I go to database operations, then we can see the database creates here, and then essentially we can see the state history in this as well. And essentially we're waiting for that to get to 100% and for the instance to be fully configured. You can see here the instance called VRA demo, and this has now already got an object in DMS. One of the reasons we have that return back and that login check is because obviously the state of this currently is init, so it's initializing that database and building it in our vCenter environment. Okay, so once we wait for that database to be created, let's set this up as a service broker catalog item, and also use an action to populate some of the details as a drop-down option for our end user as well. Okay, so back in my Cloud Assembly interface, I'm going to go back to the Design tab. I'm going to create a version for this, and I'm going to release it, and I'm going to call this initial release, my changelog. I'm now going to change this into the Service Broker interface. I'm going to go to Content and Policies. I'm going to go into my content source to begin with, and I'm going to validate this. We should now see it's changed to 4 items. So save and import that. Go to content sharing, and we need to make sure that our content is shared out there. So if we've just shared the content source fully itself, then it will be picked up automatically. If individual items have been shared, then you may need to also add that in. So we can see there it's called create DMS database. So I'm now going to go into the content tab. I'm going to go to create DMS database. I'm going to customize this form. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually enable this, because I always forget to enable it otherwise. So we've got a number of items here. We can obviously control what the end user's default inputs are, what it says, if we want tooltips and so forth here, but we're really just going to focus on one area, which is this database version. So in the API call, we need to reference a template ID to reference the version of database that's being deployed. Now, a ID is not very human readable. So we have an action which gets all of the available template IDs, the name of that template and the version of that template, and keeps it in a configuration element. So if we go back into our interface here, to show you that very quickly, it runs here in this template values, and then what we do is we actually merge the database name and version together into a single string to make it easier rather than having to pull through multiple strings into a form. So when the user selects the right version, there is a workflow that runs and then addresses this version back to the right ID to pass that through to the API call, and that happens in the background so an end user doesn't need to have to worry about it. Go back into Service Broker now. So we'll click on the database version here. We want the visibility to be set to yes. We need to change this display type to drop down. And the reason for that is because this information located in the template values, it's an array. So there's multiple strings available here. This action will not appear as an external source unless it matches the display type available. So if this was set to a text box, which is a single input, then it won't display as a source. If I click on values, then I'm going to click on value options. We're going to click on external source, and then all I need to do is start to type get in here, and it will search for the environment. And the one I'm looking for here is the get configuration values, and it's com.vmware.dms. And then I can save this, and then we can now see that this create DMS custom resource form is enabled. If I go to the catalog item and I click on create database, it's going to fill out a number of information. We can see here it's loading at the bottom the database versions as well. And if I now open this up, this shows me my list of database versions. So I can now do this as educate DMS demo 02. Call this VRA demo 02 in the instance name there as well. And actually I'm going to select a different backup time in here instead, and we're going to submit that. We'll save that, and now we can see I've got two, one which I deployed using through Cloud Assembly, one which obviously deployed through my service broker instead. We can see it's still running through here at the moment. If I go to the data management system, database operations again, you can see we're at 60%. So we're just going to wait for that to be finished for the time being. Okay, so we can see now that the create operation is successful. If we quickly go back into the orchestrator view, we can see that my the workflows run quickly. And actually, if I come out of that workflow, we actually see a number of other workflows that have been kicked off in the background for us. So these find DMS database by ID, and this is the Dynamics type discovering that new database instance that's being discovered through the API for us. And then if I go to data management for Tanzu interface, you can see that we've got successful operations here. If I go to database, we can see our two databases are now deployed. The one which I did through Cloud Assembly, the one through Service Broker. Both statuses are online now. And we can see that I selected different database versions to delineate the two as well. So this one obviously came from that drop-down selection box rather than the default option that I had in that template as well. Okay, so if I go back to my service broker interface now and we close that, I can go to either of these two, it doesn't really matter, but if I open it up I can see the objects here. I can also click on these and do the day 2 actions. I can also do this if I click into the interface, and I can click on the right hand side here as well. So I'm just going to do quickly a create database backup, and we're going to give this a vEducate recording demo backup, when I can spell correctly there. I'm going to click submit. And if I click on the history, we can now see another task that's been started. We're going to go through those same approvals. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds for this to go a bit further. Okay, so we can now see that the operation started. If I go into my orchestrator client, I refresh this, we can see that the day 2 action actually happened. It created very quickly. If I click into that, we can see all of the tasks that happened there. If I click on the data management interface and I go to database backups, we can see that we've now got a backup here for my database instance that I selected as well, I created through the interface. And obviously we have a number of other day 2 actions there. And that essentially concludes this walkthrough guide. Thank you very much.